Welcome everybody to the Community Economic Development Committee. Kiana, you want to read the roll?
Sure. Mr. Welton?
Here.
Ms. Kennedy? Mr. Peterson?
Present.
Mr. Constant?
Chris?
Right there, Chris?
Okay. He'll be back, I'm sure.
Ms. Salto? Here. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Okay, so first thing up is, and Forrest is excused, and I imagine Crystal's on bumper to bumper.
Mr. Chair, I'm here. My phone was being ridiculous.
Okay, thank you. Go around introductions. That's just good order. Start with Brown Jug. Okay. I would go ahead and just invite anyone with Brown Jug and Tim Potter up here. Anyone from staff is working on this directly?
This is about a alcohol license renewal.
Right.
Yeah. If you speak to the zoning, then bring us in.
Okay, so I think what we had was this came up in December, and then at the assembly, and then you thought you could work out some conditions, and we postponed it so that could happen.
Yes.
And we're here to see where you are.
To see where we are and be prepared for approval on Tuesday.
Okay, and we got a memorandum of understanding signed. Okay. So who wants to start, Erica? Or actually, why don't you give your names for taking part?
Tim Potter.
Erica Wilburn.
Okay. Who wants to go?
I guess I'll go first. We had a meeting. Brown Jug responded quickly and very responsibly. Came to the table. We identified the issues that we were concerned with. They took a shot at doing a draft memorandum of understanding. We made a couple of minor tweaks to it. We've had multiple discussions. They've already put policies in place to address many of our concerns. And while I would note that there is a 1-year time limit as far as this goes and some other conditions, that would hopefully put some pressure on the assembly and this committee to bring forward a sub-district area or to the entire city general limitations as far as some of the conditions on packaged liquor licenses. But the Midtown Community Council was very pleased with the approach that Brown Jug has had, as they indicated that they are a member of the business community in high standing. They've responded very well, and we're going to be supporting them with this renewal on Tuesday night.
Okay, thank you. Erica, comment?
Well, just like Tim said, we were made aware that they had concerns regarding our business and that sort of thing, only when we saw the protest in December, taking it off the table and having the discussions with the community council and being able to come to a written agreement for the MOU to further our relationships with the community. I don't see any reason for the protest to be on the license for the renewals. And we'll work with the communities, all of the communities within Anchorage, while we address the more visible problems that the city has.
Sure, Wilton, I just want to make sure that it's very clear that Lord Muscat, who is here from Edmonton, has made some very significant commitments of time, and that so has Erica. Erica has been coming to the community council meetings. I have no reason to believe that they will not keep us in good faith. The intents expressed in the memorandum of understanding. So very proactive in supporting their request for renewal.
Okay. For the record, Assemblywoman Kennedy has arrived. Welcome. Did it snow?
Traffic accident, backed up to Boniface.
Okay, so we're on Brown Jug. Okay, so what we kind of come here with is we have the resolution from December. And it came, we just postponed things, but I know we had a discussion that box for public health was checked. And there was discussion that some felt that was extreme. But I don't think we made any changes, if you recall. I think we just moved it forward. So this was I don't know, do we protest here, or we refer to the conditions? So it's basically going to AMCO and saying, okay, we're okay if you put these conditions on.
Yep.
There's
That
a
is
set of
absolutely
conditions
correct.
here.
That's the same intent that we're coming to the Assembly with.
So the conditions are slightly different, so.
And we are actually very willing and happy to simply say that this is a voluntary MOU, and technically there don't need to be any items placed as conditions on the special land use permit or the license, in our opinion. The community council feels very comfortable in taking Brown Jug in good faith that they will operate as expressed in this MOU.
Okay, so so Dean, sorry, go ahead, Meg.
Well, yeah, my question is actually for Dean as well. As far as the assembly process, if it's just the MOU should be the conditions, then how does that affect the process for the assembly, and as these come back up for review, or if there could be issues in the future? Because this is a voluntary agreement between the community council and the store, but and it's part of the record, but what's the interplay there?
Well, I think this not being incorporated into the resolution, that what Mr. Parker said, it's simply an expression of goodwill between communities and licensee. And I don't think you can use non-compliance with the terms of this as some grounds for protest. But maybe some of the actions of non-compliance are alone by themselves without an MOU sufficient grounds for protest. So, but I don't think you can say they haven't filed the MOU, so we're protesting the license. You wouldn't be able to do that. And in some other resolutions for liquor licenses in the past, we've taken some terms of the MOU that seemed appropriate and put them in the resolution itself. And if any assembly members wanted to do that, I think the shooter bottles for 170 per bottle, and competitively priced for $5 might be appropriate terms to add to the resolution. I mean, if they wanted to. It doesn't sound like that the community council, the licensee, are asking to incorporate any of it into the resolution.
Mr. Weddleton, to Ms. Zell's comment and question, when I read the special land use permit and conditional use standards and parameters in the code for this, there is no limitation of the assembly coming back even before the renewal period if there's a compliance issue and there are problems that come up. So we feel comfortable that if the assembly is willing to utilize its authority that's in code and those parameters, that we're fine coming forward. If Brown Jug or anyone else falls out of conformance with our voluntary agreements and the good faith expressed by both parties, we'll come back and we will request that the assembly intervene and take action if necessary before the next renewal comes up.
Okay. Meg?
Thanks. Would anyone from planning and or zoning be willing to talk about the enforcement of conditions of conditional use permits and what you think about what Mr. Potter just said, based on an MOU versus something in the actual permit, because I've had some kind of differing experiences when asking about the enforcement of a conditional use permit. So I'm trying to get a sense of what makes it most effective and from an operational standpoint.
Well, I'd just like to say that what Tim said was correct, that our current zoning code says that the assembly can review a special land use permit for alcohol if they feel they need to.
But in terms of the
Enforcement was your
conditions and
question,
enforcement
yeah.
that are, as they exist in an MOU, because this is kind of setting out some expectations between the parties, but it's not necessarily binding, it's just a voluntary agreement.
Yeah.
So I would
Well,
like to know from your perspective. as
Actually, I'd
the
like to
enforcement.
rope in the chief of code enforcement.
Okay.
Raising his hand in the corner.
Thank you. Unless it's incorporated in the resolution, it would be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to enforce.
That was Jack Frost. Let's
Jack
identify
Frost,
ourselves
chief
as we
of
speak. So.
But if the community council felt that the memorandum of understanding, it doesn't appear that there'd be any issues with the business following the voluntary rules, the memorandum of understanding. But if they weren't, then the community council could raise the issue with the assembly.
Those two are separate from the question I understood,
Yeah.
though.
Right.
So, but for pure enforcement of Title 21 conditions, if it's not actually in the documents that you approve, then it's not enforceable by us, correct?
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to say that they've been very responsive. We have no reason to believe that they will not comply with the agreement that we have on a voluntary basis. And it would be our desire, based on the way that they've positively responded, that we don't think that we need to put those conditions in a resolution from the assembly at this time. Now, if this all goes south, we'll be back. But I don't think that it's necessary to put that on the special land use permit at this time, or have it go forward to AMCO.
Okay. Pete.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we have other package stores in Midtown that the Midtown Community Council is interested in putting conditions on. And if you make MOUs with those businesses as well, wouldn't it be good or better to have consistency? And so we would list everything in the conditions on the renewal for all of these, or none of them? I mean, shouldn't we do them all the same?
Back to Mr. Peterson. That would be a good way to do it from a standard standpoint, but we are attempting to be a community council that is supportive of business practices that are good. And while I totally understand your point, and that might be the right way to do it, they've come to the table with a very corrective action approach and very proactive. And we'd like to, I don't want to say reward that, but when the problems were brought to their attention, they responded favorably. As far as one of the other licenses in the area that we would like to have the assembly move to revoke, that has definitely not been the case. We tried that path, and it didn't go so good. But I have no reason to believe that Brown Jug will not continue in the good faith manner they have.
Okay, did you?
Well, I'm just wanting to catch up here, and so we're talking about whether or not to eliminate section 3 of the resolution. Just thinking.
Oh, yeah.
Dean?
Yeah, I was going to mention that. I guess we already have some of the conditions in section 3. But it's also like we should just delete that. So.
Okay, so at the meeting on Tuesday, there would be a motion to amend this by deleting section 3.
Mr. Chair.
Sorry. Chris?
Thanks. So I'm hearing this conversation. I'm glad to know folks came to terms, but I'm a bit concerned about this whole process. We went from 0 to 100 in one step at the first hearing on this question. We were at basically, we want to see a revocation of this license. We want a public hearing to protest their operations, prior to having any record introduced to us that there was a problem. And we know we have problem operators all over that section of town. But it seems to me that we need to be very conscientious of how we approach these questions going forward, because despite the fact that the outcome is seemingly in the interest of both parties, it was, in my opinion, an abusive process that led us to where we are right now. And I just don't think we should ever have a business in when there's no record of problems established in front of us and threaten their license and their sustainability as a business. And so I still continue to have some concerns about how this process went and how we're planning to move forward, because I don't like to use our power in an extortive manner. We should be fair and equitable in this conversation. That's kind of my impression of this whole process.
Chris, just to clarify, so is it basically that checkbox in the public health section that triggers
Well, that's
that?
where it began, but that was like literally step 100, 100%, as opposed to let's start and have a conversation. What's going on? What are the problems? No list of problems came before us. And so that was like, let's smack you as hard as we can across the face so that you'll come to the table and have a conversation with us. I mean, there was no established record in advance of that coming to us that there was actually a problem going on here.
And okay, well, I think that's a valuable point. And looking at it, was submitted by a public safety committee. Was that typical that this comes from them, or that was unusual?
I think that's unusual.
Maybe. Let's see, I got Jack in the queue. Can I go to Tim real quick on this one? So did you go to the Public Safety Committee and talk about this?
No.
How did this come up in the Public Safety Committee?
Oh,
Your name's on there, Mr. Peterson.
No.
All right, let me go to Dean.
so would you have in code where it says the public safety committee should get these? And I think I guess standard operating process in the court's office is to have this co-sponsored by insurers of this county, public safety committee, submitted by. So it's just part of the, I guess, process, but I don't recall it coming from the public safety committee.
Okay, well, that's good to know. Thanks. Jack?
I just want to make a historical reference here. I've been doing code enforcement here for 25 years. I am not advocating for this business or any other business, but without exception, at different locations through town for Brown Jug over the years, every single time that we've had even an inquiry of how they do their operations, they've been very responsive. They help clean up many areas of the community on volunteer efforts on weekends. So our experience from code enforcement is that they've been very responsive. Again, I'm not advocating for them or any other business, just information.
No, it's valuable for us to hear, so I appreciate that. Meg?
Thanks. If I may, Chris, when you say you want an established record, I guess I'm a little unclear of what or how you would like information to come before the body, and against what standard. I guess that's what I'm trying to reconcile is if...
Right, so I can help you with that.
Can I add one more layer onto it really
Yep.
quick for you? If part of that record includes the MOU, that voluntary agreement, or if it's simply code and assembly action based?
Any of that would be fine. If there had been a record that said we wanted to have an MOU and they said no, we don't want to do that, then that's an interesting point to bring forward. But what we did in our action that was introduced was literally go, we want to kill your business because you're a bad operator. Now come and have a conversation with us, right? And that's like the end point of our action. That's the biggest hammer we have. We can't go swinging the biggest hammer we have on the first step of the conversation. Otherwise, you know, I just don't I don't know how to communicate the failure that I feel we did in that process. And so what any record would be, does the community council have a very concrete list of times and dates specific problems? That's one thing. Has the community council engaged with them and had a failure? That's another thing. Does code enforcement have a list of problems? Like, we just, in my opinion, have to be very careful when we go swinging these massive hammers around, that we do it on the basis of an actual record and not just the community council has decided we want to do this with every business in our neighborhood, because they're all problems.
Can I ask you a follow-up then on that? Mr. Wellington
Yep.
says I can. With regard to that then, would you want to see then the voluntary conditions in an MOU then somehow codified either in a conditional use permit or the assembly's approval of the license?
I would like to see just some process in advance of all of that. The end point is what comes from the conversation, but the conversation should actually be about what's happening there. What are we doing? Where are we going? I just don't know that it's wise that we literally bring up an operator who has not been demonstrated before us to have a record of problems and then move right to, we want to protest your license. Right? There has to be something in advance of that. What the end product is, it doesn't matter. I'm happy to see businesses engaging in MOUs. I'm happy even when we have problem operators to attach the conditions to their license or their special land use permit. But it should all be done fairly and through an eyes open process, not jump to the last step before we get to the first step.
Did you have a follow-up, Nick?
I'm thinking about his response, so no, not right this second.
I just to clarify, Tim, I'll get to Chris. So Chris, just looking at this, is your sense that when we got this, particularly with the check mark already in one of those boxes, that would be premature? So more typically,
just imagine you're that business,
right,
and you haven't been addressed, and no one came to you and said, look, we want to do these things, and then all of a sudden you're before the assembly for protecting the ongoing, just open doors of your business.
Yeah, you made your point well. I appreciate that. So kind of my view is that when we get these put before us, that there should be no check boxes. We should decide those at the meeting. And then if there's a section for conditions, that's something we should develop at the Tuesday meeting. And
or from there, we delay it enough time that we can do that thoughtfully, right? It doesn't have to be, if we have the time to do it in a committee meeting, do it in a process. But yes, we should be thoughtful and in agreement before we put a red scarlet letter on someone's chest.
Yeah, okay, good, thank you. Ken?
One thing that would be very helpful would be if you started treating alcohol as you do marijuana in your review.
Amen.
Why does the applicant for renewal or a new or a transfer not have to go to the community council as part of the process in advance? You know that, and Chris, you are obviously aware of how much work it is on a voluntary basis for the community council members to keep up with everything and do everything. So Mandy sends out a notice to all the community councils about which licenses are coming up for renewal every 2 years. And on that basis, we get that, and then typically you don't have the time to be as proactive as you might want to be because it's a voluntary organization. So when the applicant actually applies for their renewal, which is a couple of months before the activity really starts, is when you put your time in. And if you want to look at the package of information that the community council and I myself put together for this brown jug operation, I think that we put in some pretty decent information and photographic dated at that location and others to show a trend at the time. And what I believe happened is that the appropriate thing happened. The issue was raised to a point, and I don't want to talk about checking safety boxes or public health, but if you want to look at those pictures and tell me that there's not a safety of public health, an impact on the adjacent community and other property owners, then you and I are on totally different pages.
But that's not what I saw.
Brown Jug could have come to the community council.
I reviewed the record, and what I saw was a bunch of pictures that I couldn't actually tag to that location, and I needed information. And so why in the world would we jump to the end before we sat down and talked about the content of your package?
Okay, so when the pictures show the front door of the business with the name above it with the address, you can't tell where it is?
It's all that other stuff, all of the piles of trash. It was all dissociated. And so to me, that's where we need to have a conversation as opposed to bring this up on the dais.
And I don't disagree, but the community council is put in a position where they have to do something in about a 2-month period to get their act together and provide some information. We did that. Brown Jug came forward on a very proactive basis.
Did the problem only start 2 months before, or was the problem ongoing? Because these issues likely don't just pop up at the time of licensing. And so these conversations should be and can be ongoing at community councils, and they are, at least in my experience. When the problem is the problem, it's not about the licensing period. The licensing period is the target for action, but it's an ongoing issue. And you deal with it in an ongoing way. That's the way that the community hears there's a problem, is because the communities are engaging in a monthly battle with an operator who's not doing their job.
Okay.
And so,
and I would add, Chris, that, you know, I may agree with what you just said, but there should also be an obligation on the part of those businesses that are operating and asking for a special land use permit to be renewed every 2 years to go to the community council. So I would appreciate it
I
if
agree.
the assembly would consider that be added. That might be a much more straightforward way to get
Yep.
the community council and the operators to all be talking well in advance of when this
I
issue
100%
comes to a
agree,
head.
Tim.
Okay, I think we.
And in fact, the Downtown Community Council has been kind of up in arms about the same thing, that the process in some ways starts too late for them to get engaged, which may be something we can work with the clerk to set up a 6-month notification as opposed to the 2-month notification. And so we can institute an earlier awareness. But I also agree that it would be great to have a requirement for the MOU and a requirement for a hearing with the community council. I think it's fabulous.
Because this actually gives us the opportunity with the MOU
Tim, we got it.
to be able to actually have a relationship with the operators that is very positive, because we think that we can help them as well.
Okay, I think we got it. So, Chris, you made a good point. Tim, thank you for support there. Meg, you had a point?
I don't have a point. I have a question maybe, because I'm still trying to reconcile whether or not we should be putting these conditions on the license and in the conditional use permit, because that seems to really get to possibly the heart of this. If the Midtown Community Council or any community council is having an issue with an operator and it's something that is specifically spelled out in the conditional use permit, they should be able to call code enforcement to go have a look at it. If they're not having good luck in resolving it at the voluntary informal level, but if those conditions that they're concerned about or that were in their MOU aren't reflected in the conditional use permit, then code enforcement's hands are tied. I'm just kind of restating it all to make sure I understand. And then if the assembly is looking at a license and it's that the operator isn't complying with the memorandum of understanding, but it was never codified or put into the conditions of the actual license, then in some ways our hands are tied because they didn't violate the conditions of the license. So I feel like we're kind of in this endless loop of not being particular enough with either giving the MOU some weight or just saying, well, that's voluntary and we'll wait until there are lots of problems with MOUs before we start putting conditions on conditional use permits or licenses. And this seems to be a reoccurring theme. So I'm kind of, whether or not that has to be resolved with this particular license or as a structural change, I'm uncomfortable with it. Because I feel like you got to start somewhere. It's either a full code change somewhere, and I'm not familiar enough with the code provisions to suggest where that would be right on the fly, or you have to start with a particular operator and then make it the commitment that it's every operator moving forward. And I don't know to what extent the power of the community council is supposed to be with these in this process, like what level of power, because they are the community advocate, and I don't know if anyone has any answers or solution to that, but so I'm really uncertain of how we should proceed.
Just, I guess, a clarifying question to some members of Alatel. Or we were having a sidebar discussion about something that we think we understood you say, which is potentially this voluntary agreement could be meaningless unless inserted into the resolution. Let's not forget that, as I forget now, I think maybe Mr. Potter said earlier, at any point, if the community council, which has entered into a voluntary agreement with the operator, feels that it's been violated, they can come knock on your door. So it's not entirely meaningless or powerless. We want to make sure that that's clear.
What I'm hearing from members, though, at least on this makeup of the body, is that without something that gives this kind of some legal enforcement, like these conditions and beyond them being voluntary, that it's a question mark of whether or not we should say that violation of these is enough to start placing conditions on a license, or without an enforcement action, do we have enough evidence that we should be doing or taking any action?
And that's a discretionary call for you. It's separate from Jack's concerns about enforcement. But I think, again, as Tim Potter said earlier, even without an MOU, if a community council comes to you and says this is a terrible business, that gives you the go-ahead to start looking at it.
Let's go to, okay, Jack, you want to? Okay, Chris, did you chime in? Constant?
What's that? Mr. Chair, I do have a comment.
It's your turn.
So, in the conversation with Mom and Pops, this question came up because our resolution recommended to the state the conditions on the license, and I didn't know if they had adopted the conditions. And so I started asking the question, so if it's just recommended, if it's not adopted, how do we enforce it? Is it enough to trigger an action? And so I think that it is a fair question to ask, and it is the reality that if it's not clear language, then enforcement is very likely limited to whatever the clarity of the action is because of the property rights associated. And so with that in mind, I think what Mr. Potter proposed in this specific case is a preliminary step where you take an operator who is not historically bad but has for some time had some troubling behaviors. They've committed to a corrective action, and the community agrees in this case we don't need to go all the way to record it onto the license or the special land use permit. And so if we all agree that that is in fact the case, then we all recognize if we come back, then the next conversation is either go to the license with the conditions special land use permit, or if it's bad enough, move for revocation. And so I think that actually both are consistent, just they are kind of differences of time.
Okay, thank you. Jack, did you have something to add?
No, thank you.
I did a question for you real quick. So, I mean, Chris's point was if we're just recommending that the state make these conditions. If we have conditions in a resolution like this, is that something you can enforce on?
If it's part of the conditional use permit, the conditions on the permit, we can. If it's a resolution, then I would say probably not. It's just a resolution.
Because this just says we're asking the state to put these conditions.
This is almost like the whereas clause.
Yeah. Okay.
It's restating the problem, but doesn't provide any enforcement.
Okay, that's important for your point, Meg.
Yeah, and Chris, to your point, I understand it, but that gets to the issue you raised in Mom and Pops, which is that you were looking for hard evidence, independent evidence, and that independent evidence you wanted possibly from code enforcement. And so if we don't memorialize that community agreement either on the conditional use permit or possibly the license, or one or the other, then we'll never be able to get that hard evidence you're looking for. So I feel like we're chicken and egg a little bit here.
Well, no, I think that my last comment, though, Mr. Chair, I'm sorry for bumping in. I have to run in a minute, but the process that using this example with the brown jug, not Mom and Pops, what the community council said is we have an MOU now, which is a major step forward. That's enough for now. And then if we need to and problems continue, then we will come back to this. So it's not a circle, it's a step on the way. And so, but with Mom and Pops, we now have a long record of communication from the community that demonstrates actual problems from the operation, and we have conditions on the license that give code enforcement the means to go in and do the actual enforcement, because these conditions were applied to their license by AMCO. And so even in that example, we have the tools we need. And what I asked for was some third-party, independent, local, our evaluation, not third-party, our evaluation of our people to back up what we're hearing from the community, because if it is so bad, then our guys are not going to have a problem finding it. So to me, again, it's not circular. It's just this one process is closer to a conclusion, and the other process is closer to the initiation of this process.
Mr. Welton and members.
Well, hold on, I got Jack next, then I'll go to Tim, and then Crystal. Jack.
From the land use perspective, this is very similar to these are similar to covenants. We don't enforce covenants. And that's what you have is a civil agreement between two parties, the community council and a business. And that's great, it's productive, it's positive, but from an enforcement standpoint, it doesn't have any teeth. So whatever it is you want us to enforce, you have to tell us. And so that's, yeah.
But just to clarify, having them listed in section 3 like we do here, where we just are asking AMCO to add them as conditions, that doesn't give you anything to go on.
Correct.
Okay. Tim?
Yeah, I think that Chris, actually the first time he spoke about it being a step, encapsulated the community council's feelings and our intent very well. That we believe that it was a necessary step to get their attention. They came to the table and responded as good as anybody could as a responsible business. And we think that based on our interface with them, that we have no reason to believe that we're going to have a continuation of those problems. And that we think that the step was taken. You are our backstop to make sure that there was another step that could be taken. We don't think that's required right now. If it is, we'll come back.
Okay, thank you. Crystal?
A couple of things, I guess. First of all, I think if we were eliminating that checkbox, that A section, the public health box, that to me sounds like we're being very accusatory, and I don't think that's the intent of this resolution. But keeping section 3 in there in terms of what the expectation is, in terms of how this would be operated in this area, is not punitive. It's just saying these are the expectation in this community that we have for these particular kinds of alcohol or items that would be sold. So I don't see a problem with keeping section 3 if this body believes that a community council has the ability to regulate something this prescriptive in a particular area. So and because it is in terms of that particular area, it's fair. It's being the same requirements are being levied against other stores. But anyway, we could make this so that this is basically just saying this is the expectation for operations of this particular entity in this area. But we don't have to make it sound punitive by checking that public health box. So anyway, I think the bigger question really is, do we think it's right or fair to say that businesses that operate in this area will have this particular restriction limited to them and where they're selling? So I don't know if this group can answer that question.
I want to clarify a little bit. So if you were interested in keeping conditions in section 3, would you make them match more closely with here?
No, I would, no, maybe, probably not. Mostly because they probably ought to be, if they're using specific numbers like the $1.70, that should probably match up. But it doesn't look to me like there's any real difference between, maybe I'm missing something. But it doesn't look to me like there's any real difference, at least in the ones that are on the resolution. They're really pretty specific already.
Well, the fortified beer changed. Number 2 equates to the B, which has more clearly what a fortified beer is, and it doesn't give a price. It says competitively priced.
Okay. So really, what's the preference there then?
That was my question to you.
No, what I mean is, I guess from the community council's perspective, which one is more meaningful, and which one has more or less of an impact on the community that you're trying to eliminate or reduce.
Kennedy, I can say out loud and proudly that if they had not responded in the fashion they did, we would not be suggesting that you not carry through and put those requirements in your resolution to create a record. If they had not responded, and Erica and Larry, especially from Edmonton, we've been on the phone quite a number of times now, and he's been very open, as has Erica, to explain what protocol they've put in place now. I've seen it in writing. When people operate well, they should be rewarded. That should be the expectation. And I believe that Brown Jug wants to be the operator that sets the bar that everybody else is judged against. When we go to the other end of the scale, and we have a mom and pops, who I hope you actually move to revoke their land use permit, that's a totally different thing. But we've got 3 years worth of effort on that one, you know. And I think that when a business comes to the table the way that Brown Jug did, that it sends a message to everybody else as well, that, you know, they stepped up, they responded. Maybe they weren't paying attention exactly to certain aspects of what was going on their grounds, but they have now, and that's good. And don't wrap a bunch of cord around them to make them honest, because I think they're honest. If they would not have responded that way, and we hadn't had the discussions we had, and they hadn't already put in place things, I would be speaking very differently on behalf of the community council, and our votes would have been much different. So it is a process, there are steps, and if it takes us, if they go totally south, which I don't have any thought that they would do, and don't respect the fact that this was a good faith agreement, and tomorrow they start operating differently, we'll be back. And if it takes us 2 years to the next renewal, we're not real patient, but we're pretty patient. And so, you know, that's where I'm at. I don't know that we have to take the step to mark their AMCO thing or have something that we believe is going to be an enforceable deal. I know that I can pick up the phone or email Erica or Larry, and it'll be taken care of.
Okay, if I could chime in. So I think we got that point. I think we got a yes/no. Were someone to put conditions in here, should that be proposed, would you prefer what's in the existing one in front of us, or would you prefer what's in your MOU? That's not a yes/no.
I think the MOU
or resolution.
MOU or resolution. Yes/no.
MOU.
Thank you. Got that? Okay. Not to say that that'll be done.
Okay.
Erica?
So I've been listening, sorry, trying to catch up on all this, but I feel Section 3 is a resolution to put this on our AMCO license, and I don't feel that that's a necessary or appropriate step, seeing as how this resolution was the first contact the community council had with our business. They didn't contact us with their package prior, they just we have an MOU that's similar to other businesses in their area. If you would like to, I'm perfectly fine with a condition on our conditional use, land use for the city, stating that we'll follow the memorandum. But as memorandums can change as the circumstances within the city or, you know, each area of the city changes, they're all open for change. So it would need to be that we have to follow the existing MOU as a condition of our land use within the city, but not on our state license, because we haven't done anything regulatory incorrectly.
Okay, very good, thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Let me go to Meg real quick, then you, Chris.
Yep.
Meg?
Yes, so I don't think we should put conditions on the license, but I do think we need to revisit how we get what's in the MOU or language in the MOU so that code enforcement can look at it in terms of the municipal enforcement and whether or not that's something, if there's some way to broadly do it so that it incorporates all of the conditions of the MOU, if these are done on a yearly basis and there's just some way to get them without it being a whole big deal, or if it's that we have to be working these conditions into the conditional use permits, because I feel like the process is really feeling amorphous, and that doesn't provide consistency and predictability for anyone, not for the business, not for the community council, and not for this body. So I would like to see that be a really predictable process so everybody knows what to expect.
Okay, thank you. Jack?
I was just for the attorneys, but perhaps it get incorporated by reference.
That's kind of what I was thinking too.
How do you... Chris, can you hold on a sec? We'll go to Dean on that one. So Jack, you're...
Yep.
So we would just somehow refer in the resolution to the MOU. Is that what you're... The conditions?
That's my thought, but the attorney would have it.
Okay, yeah. Dean, what
We have considered that in the past for some other resolutions for new licenses to incorporate the MOU, and we didn't recommend it. Ms. Ms. Wink-Person. Just, I guess, community council is not a regulatory body. Of course, they want to work to make sure businesses don't have negative impact on the communities. But for them, the MOU, the force of law resolution, they were able to change it. It just didn't seem appropriate use, I guess.
From my point of view, it'd be a recommendation.
To them, and I think that the MOUs, I think like Mr. Constance said, they're a good, I guess, plan for addressing the public safety and public health impacts in the area, the corrective actions, so to speak. But then if there continue to be public health and safety impacts, those are the grounds, not violations of any conditions, but that public safety impacts from that business to revoke or conditions and so forth. So I think the MOUs are very useful in terms of avoiding having present. I also wanted to, if I could, clarify the checking the box for public health on our resolution of the clerk's office working with them to develop this work. And the language, in the paragraph sounds pretty serious and significant. And it just actually is duplicating what's in the code, and it was supposed to help serve as a guide for what types of things citizens consider when they decide whether there's public health grounds to request conditions. All of these check boxes are findings from the assembly that you need to do. You need to make some findings in order to support conditions that you want to request AMCO to add. So there's this chain here. If you uncheck public health, you wouldn't have grounds for adding anything in section 3. If you were going to remove those conditions, you would uncheck the box, but I don't think you would do one without the other. You see what I mean? And here, you could make findings at the bottom of that public health paragraph specific to this ground location. If you wanted to make that sort of reference. You could do that verbally on the record when we're talking about this. Anyways, I wanted to just clarify that we don't want to uncheck that box and leave in conditions. You need to make findings to support those, otherwise it's arbitrary, capricious, unreasonable. I hope that makes sense. But perhaps this is a good catalyst for us to look at revising our template here so that it doesn't sound so heavy-handed at the outset when you check one box here. I did want to ask one other thing, if I could. So now I heard Mr. Frost say, yeah, we can't enforce these conditions that are in the resolution. There's recommendations to AMCO. But to take it one step further, if AMCO does approve adding these conditions to the state license, then code enforcement would be able to enforce them. Is that correct?
What we've done in the past is AMCO conditions, they enforce them. We only enforce what the conditional use permit approves.
Okay.
The condition.
Does an APD do some enforcement of conditions specific to licenses?
Are they ready? Hey, folks, I have to leave. I'm sorry.
Okay. Why
Yep.
don't you go ahead? You're next on the list.
Yeah, I would offer that the process has actually been pretty methodical, that people could understand it up until really this resolution that came so surprisingly. But I think that just this meeting alone and any meeting we have in regards to this license helps in the establishment of a clear, non-arbitrary, non-capricious decision, that it's deliberative. So should we come back forward into the future to deal with this issue, we've already established a benchmark of a record. And so that's a lot. That's a thing in and of itself. And so with that, I just say thanks, and I'm sorry I have to leave.
All right, thanks, Chris. Crystal?
Thanks. A couple of things. First of all, I think for Dean, a question. When I look at the boxes that are checked, to me, those boxes are there as a way of giving a reason for denying a license. I mean, all of these are basically about reasons why you wouldn't want to approve one and you would not waive your right to protest. So to me, those are all very punitive. They're already making a judgment that this particular applicant is not going to be able to comply with all the needs or all the regulations that need to be approved before anything's approved. So anyway, but what we're doing, though, to a certain extent, when we look at each of these, we're being somewhat, well, we're just not really being fair. You know, I mean, I guess that's what I wrestle with is, are we able to specifically say, well, this particular licensee is going to have to do these particular things, but maybe the one next door doesn't. And by looking at the resolution or the MOU, looks to me like there are things that are being carefully crafted that pertain to this one entity. I guess I'm just kind of wrestling with that in terms of, can we really do that if we're not being consistent enough to say that everybody should have this particular requirement to not sell more than 2 shooters to, I don't know what the deal is about advertising or promoting the fortified beer, single cans. Anyway, that one's even kind of confusing in terms of what they're really asking. But anyway, it just goes back to the question of how do we do something like this that wants to take into account how cooperative a business is, yet at the same time there's still an expectation of certain things that should or shouldn't be, could or couldn't be sold in this particular community council's area. I'm having problems making that jive to something that's consistent.
I mean, it's a very good question. It's sort of a compound question, I think. It's, I think, a risk under equal protection to just sort of say everybody in this area has to not sell more than 2 shooters to somebody.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have some basis for, you could make that an area-wide restriction in Title 10, Chapter 1050s, or alcohol regulations. And if you do that, then it's across the board. I think you would find some pushback on that sort of economic regulation, and that's actually a good research project that I should have. But I think, like when you're saying, applying these conditions to one liquor licensee that don't apply to one next door, that's, I think, sort of a result of the whole process we have with any licensees that come up for renewal, and you address them one at a time. We looked at this, I think, maybe before you joined the body, in terms of trying to do regional restrictions similar to what we have here, these conditions for just the, was it Midtown area?
Midtown, so
you have a lot of bodegas, people come up and say we have a package store, we don't have any track record of problems, why should we have these restrictions? So it would be kind of arbitrary to apply to them.
So hold on, I want to be really careful here. We should focus, given time, only on Brown Jug, this issue now. Area restrictions has been a long time, not that it's not important, but that's a long discussion.
But that seems to me that that's what that's doing.
That is absolutely, Tim Potter's all about that.
I understand.
And the Midtown Community Council, I should say.
Okay.
So, but
so
if we get
is
into
that
that
language
discussion,
then? But that's my question. Is that language then consistent with what is used for other licenses in that area? Because what I see happening is we're looking at a couple of establishments that we think are problem areas. So we've kind of come up with some restrictions that we think will help them operate a little bit better and be less of a negative impact to the community. But we're saying some of those businesses already handle that kind of problem very well, those challenges. So we're not going to be quite as restrictive on them. So to me, I'm still trying to figure out then really what's the expectation of all of these organizations or all these businesses, so that we can decide they either comply or they don't. But now we're saying, well, we'll let this one do this because they've been pretty good, but this other one's just really been bad, so we're going to make this a higher level of attainment for that particular compliance. So anyway, this is I'm afraid that it was kind of like the cart before the horse thing that you were talking about, is if we don't really have a clear expectation of all these stores, whether they comply or not, isn't really what we're dealing with in a license. That's a code enforcement issue. And it might be the ability then later, if they're not being enforced, or if they're not complying, then it might be a way of taking back a license. But for purposes of this, there needs to be some consistency between all of the all the businesses that are operating in this particular area. And I don't see that.
Pete?
Thank you. And so something that Mr. Potter said earlier makes me think that maybe we should be looking at making amendments to our code so that when alcohol businesses that are seeking renewal for alcohol license or a new alcohol license would be treated similar to the way the marijuana businesses were. We required that they get together with the community councils and create some sort of community communication plan or whatever you want to call it. I don't know if that's something that we're leaning towards, but it almost sounds like that's the direction that we're headed right now. I don't know if that's where we think we should be going or not, but that's where it sounds like I think we're headed.
Meg?
I would move that we recommend approval of this license without the public health box checked and with no conditions in Section 3. I think that's appropriate.
Okay. Is there a second?
Sure.
Second.
I can speak really, really quickly to it if you're okay with that, Mr. Chair. I think that's consistent with what we recently did on the Cars Safeway, the new Cars Safeway license and others, because there hadn't been a demonstration of issues or problems, and they agreed to a similar MOU. I still do have concerns about enforceability, but I think that's the conditional land use permit process. I need to learn and look at that more closely. I don't think it's appropriate to put the conditions on the license at this time. And I think it's clearly distinguishable from the other license before us at Mom and Pops.
Shall we vote? Any opposition? Kristen?
Well, even if I opposed, there would probably still be a majority that would recommend. But anyway,
But let's add to the discussion.
That's fine. So,
Should we make that recommendation? But we've reported to the body before that we had that recommendation and it was not unanimous.
Yeah, well, I'm kind of part and partial a little bit here on it, because I do agree that that box should be unchecked, because that's basically saying that they've already demonstrated something that we believe is a public nuisance or public health issue, and I don't know that that's true. In fact, that's basically what you're saying is, there's definitely been some improvement on that. So anyway, so I agree to that part of it, but I'm still wrestling with the conditions in Section 3. Because I don't see that as being punitive. I see that as an expectation of the community council that all the other businesses are expected to too, unless that was only done as a way of trying to control the bad behavior of other organizations.
We've only done it once. I think our point though from Dean too is that if we attach conditions, we need to have a finding somewhere. And it doesn't have to be a checkbox. We could come up with another one. Those checkboxes were just a handy way to.
Yeah. Well, we have more work to do on that. So I'll follow the recommendation of doing exactly that, the unchecked box and deleting Section 3. And I will, just as a clerical thing, it's section 4, or section 2 on line 31, that should be the new section 3, I guess. It should have been section 4.
Well, it's already
right?
correctly numbered if we get rid of 3.
Well, no, it'll be section 3,
so that's
but anyway, yeah. So just pointing that out, that's all, so.
Did you get that, Keon?
Thank you.
Yes.
Whole sequential number thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so recommendation will be to no check boxes, go forward with no conditions, and renumber the property.
So,
All right.
omit section 3.
So omit section 3. Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, so next topic, somewhat briefly. We have a continued discussion on topics for possible updates to Section 1080, the marijuana licensing. And since I'd like to do it, I know you had yours, but Jeff came up with these. Can we go to
Good,
Jeff's?
absolutely, yeah.
I
Mine were
printed
just
these out,
general,
too.
general concepts.
Okay, if we get to yours, we'll print it. Or you want to do the send us hand it up now?
Oh, you did? No, fine, okay.
Okay, but I'd like to do Jeff's then, because it'd be
Okay.
fairly quick, and then he doesn't have to keep going. Okay, so I'm handing out a copy of an email that Crystal sent to Mandy and myself, just kind of listing some of her thoughts. Just it's that official.
Well, that was in regard to how we trigger the review process for renewal applications. So.
Didn't work. Okay, but since we have Jeff Hickman here,
Specifics, yeah.
he made a very nice little presentation. And Jack, perhaps if you're involved, I'd just like to go through that. Is that really?
I don't know, you pulled it out,
Oh, I did,
so.
okay.
Let me see.
I think this was handed down. I've got it. Jeff, you want to just go through this and maybe highlight recommendations?
Yeah,
Sure.
it's on the back.
And one thing, to answer your question from last night, I don't know if you saw my response because I did like right before this meeting. So there's one over here that's prohibits 1835 on the right column, third from the bottom. It says within 10 feet of playground equipment. And to answer your question, we did change ours last year, but I guess when I wrote this up, it wasn't in the code yet. So, but our code now has under 1650.0108.10 that there's no smoking within 20 feet of the playground equipment when children are present. So we are actually more strict on that than the state. So my presentation says that we don't have anything that equates that. So we're actually less strict, not more strict.
Just a point, do we have a copy of this for Eugene? Did I make enough? The email from Crystal.
Yeah, it's extra. So basically, the state enacted a smoking ordinance that kind of overrides our smoking ordinance in some ways. And there are some things in that code that are more strict than our code. So it makes it difficult for us to do any kind of enforcement when we have two sets of codes overlapping and they don't match. So the state code will trump us, but we can't enforce it because it's state code. So the state has to send in their code enforcement guy to do the same job. So, and that's what they've been doing. Like over here, they now have distance for smoking from bars that's 10 feet. Our ordinance is 5 feet. So their ordinance is more strict than our ordinance, so it would override us, and 10 feet is the distance from a bar door, even though our code says 5. So, but we can't enforce 10 feet because it's not our code. So, and then we have one in there that prohibits 50 feet from medical facility entrances, which the state code doesn't address that at all. So we're more strict there. So like the health department, you can't smoke within 50 feet of the door of the health department or a hospital or a clinic or a surgery center or anything like that. So And then we allow smoking in 25% of hotel rooms. The state bans it completely. So that's, again, a difference. So that we couldn't enforce. And then they have no smoking in a private residence if used as a child care facility at all, ever, kids or no kids. Our code only specifies when kids are present. So that's more strict. Let's see. And then you've got the state code allows marijuana smoking, which is, I guess, it's going to be up in front of the public here soon, and our code does not. So inside marijuana shop, we don't ban vaping at all anywhere except in Town Square Park officially, and the state bans it everywhere except in very specific conditions. I think it was vape shops that were in business before a certain date under the same ownership, and standalone buildings and a bunch of restrictions, but they do allow it only in that very specific scenario. But restaurants and other buildings and everywhere else is banned. And our code has no reference to vaping at all other than not in Town Square Park. So we're less strict there. Let's see, we already talked about playgrounds. And 1835 allows us to be more strict than state code in our code, but it doesn't mention that we can be less strict. So, and then that last one down there, 1835, 357 allows us as a municipality to opt out of the state ordinance completely, so then we don't have to worry about the differences. But there's a bunch of rules, and that's lawyer stuff, so I don't know how we would deal with that. So.
Well, this is good. I appreciate your putting this forward. We had been focusing on marijuana changes, and this is more on smoking, but that's not
right.
To
but
say
it's all kind of related.
Yeah.
Because if we have to enforce one thing, we can't enforce the ordinances completely because they're vastly different in some places. So if we have to try to enforce stuff, it would be good if we're going to go ahead and change our ordinance to do marijuana change, then we should think about doing all the changes and be done with it.
Sure. Go ahead.
Well, so we could go ahead. We don't have to wait till the marijuana thing passes or doesn't pass. We could do some of these just totally separate, especially if we know they're inconsistent. Or are you saying you would just rather wait and do everything in one fell swoop?
I could do it however you guys want to do it. So it doesn't matter to us because it's the same amount of work now or later. So.
Meg?
Have these been brought to the Health Policy Committee? Because I know they've been working on vaping and
I don't believe I have not done anything with that. I don't know if Natasha has done anything, so we have to go through the director on that one.
That was what came to me is because they were working on stuff, but that would be. Are you on that?
Yes.
You are. Okay. Are you co-chair or
no?
Just on the committee.
Just participating.
What are you guys working on there?
We just wrapped up. I'm not sure what the next agenda. We didn't meet in January, so I'm not sure what February's agenda is. I don't have it committed to memory.
So the vaping, I know there was discussion of possible tax. Was there restrictions on?
There was discussion of potential restrictions on vaping. I'm kind of waiting to see what the FDA and some of the federal responses were going to be.
Oh, because that's in flux right now.
It has been, yes.
Well, this would be important because we're saying smoking. Do we mean vaping and cigarettes for
the
cigars?
definition of smoking does not include vaping, so whereas in the state code it does.
Okay, so that would be a place to start.
Actually, didn't that change with Tobacco 21? I think we started to redefine it there.
Did we there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to check in with those co-chairs to make sure we're not doing duplicative work, or if we're doing work that we're making sure we coordinate so that we're not putting forward something.
Crystal?
Thanks. Just a couple of questions on the mechanics of how some of this works. So if a bar has a liquor license with the state and the municipality, and we say that they have to restrict smoking within 5 feet of the door, but the state law says it has to be with 10 feet, which one are they going to comply with?
Well, they would have to comply with the state code because that's who's going to come and enforce on them.
Okay, so
if it's 10 feet, we can't go and do that enforcement. We're going to enforce 5 feet. but that's not what the more restrictive state code would trump us. But we can't enforce it. The state code enforcement guy is doing enforcement inside of Anchorage. So, and we had a discussion with them about a year ago or so about that. So letting us know that they're doing those complaints, and if they run across one that's not in their wheelhouse, they'll send it to us.
So there are some then that would be strictly municipal.
Right, like 50 feet from a clinic, that would be strictly municipal.
Okay.
Or a condo association has banned smoking on their property completely. The code allows the property owner to do that. I don't know the state would come in and do that if they were smoking someplace where the condo association said you can't smoke and asked us to help them with a Monterey resident.
Right, but I'm talking about one that's specific to an alcohol license. So for the most part, you're not really even going to be.
We would enforce 5 feet, but if the
but you're not going to have
in
to, because they're already going to have to comply with the state
with
rule.
10 feet.
Yeah.
That would be the state that would have to come and enforce it, and that goes with the signage too, because the signage is different, because ours is 5 and theirs is 10. And
okay, and then so what do they
So,
typically do?
I've been seeing the state signs popping up.
I would think that they would
So-
have to go with that rather than
Yeah.
even bother with ours, right?
Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
unless we option over here with 1835, 357, and that's to opt out completely, and to just use the ordinance we have in place, and then our code would trump it, and it wouldn't matter. So if I read that correctly, that's going to be for the lawyers to figure out how that works.
You know, I have signs at my store in the Fourplex that the state gave us. You could contact them, but they say 20 feet from the door. So you're saying a bar you can smoke closer to the door?
That's what their code says. It says 10 feet from a bar. Yeah, it's closer for a bar, and it's 20. Ours is 20. Is it 20 feet or 25 feet from a door of a regular place, and 50 feet from a clinic. So we have 3 distances in our.
My signs all say 20 because I got 3 signs from the state.
Yeah. I think. I know my phone has decided to update.
That
my
have
phone. I'm
something
trying to read the
for
code.
kids or pregnant.
Standard stuff. It was.
If I remember, Mr. Heckman, maybe you remember, the code allows private property or
Yes, to set their own
to have
standards.
different distance to
Yeah.
their property line. They can have a greater distance to the code minimum.
No, the code requires a certain distance. A private property owner could ban it completely or make the distance less,
It's
but they.
40 feet.
No, they couldn't do that. It says reasonable distance in the code if none is specified, and it says a reasonable distance is considered 20 feet. So, and my phone decided to do an update while I'm trying to read the code. So lovely. So I don't have the code now. Yeah, we have some distances specified, but there is a reasonable distance clause there right after the main part. Which would apply to anyone who is not covered directly by the distances. And then I think it bans it completely in municipal structures and in stadiums and places like that. So
I think whoever gives out the free signs, their rule.
yeah,
prevails.
well, we have signs too, but ours just say no
Whoever
smoking,
decides
so
to
we don't
Yeah.
have distances inscribed on
That's
our signs.
interesting. Meg?
Oh, I think we should hold on the updates to any smoking in the code right now until such time as either we check in with the Health Policy Committee and maybe wait to see what the outcome of the April ballot question is, so that if we're going, things have kind of remained static while that's percolating through. And then I know it's not code changes to specifically that, but so that we're not shaking up something that might change enforcement later or right away as we move forward with that.
Okay, so I guess the thing for it is, Meg, you bring this to the Health Committee, and then we'll look at it as something there if they choose, and it sounds like they're working on this stuff. We know in April how that vote goes, so April, May. Does that work? Are you like tripping over this stuff now, or is it just
No.
kind of an issue out there?
No, it's just there, and we just kind of know about it. We don't get that many smoking complaints anymore, but there is those conflicts where a hotel or some operator may have conflicting information and may inadvertently violate the state code, thinking they're in compliance. 5 feet from the door versus 10, or 25% of your room versus 0%.
That's a big deal.
Yeah, especially in some places where people.
Or the
stay more than
childcare.
a day. Yeah, the child care facilities, you can't smoke at all, and ours say you can when they're not there, so, and things like that, so. I would recommend we either fix our code to match the state code or opt out, so.
Okay. Dean?
Is someone in the health department or law department dropped in an ordinance for this?
I haven't started any work on it yet till I've got some direction to do so. So once that happens, then we can start on that. I don't know that it would be. Yeah, so it'd probably be me when the time comes.
Okay, so you have a reprieve unless it becomes a crisis.
Good one, Sal.
What's that? Yeah.
Okay, good. Thanks. So we just have a few minutes.
So can I jump in then?
Yeah,
on just
please
this?
do.
Okay. Well, several months ago, John and I met with Felix regarding what he thought this committee wanted to do, and one of the things that I brought up was this idea that, we typically have a review or a renewal application that comes up for our review, and we don't necessarily have any real trigger points by which we say, oh, this one needs to actually come before the CEDC and be reviewed. It technically is like, I think I'd like to look at that one again, or oh, I heard this comment. So it was just real arbitrary and subjective. So I was hoping we would come up with a list of potential reasons why we would actually want to send a renewal application for further review. And typically there are several things that we already go with. A lot of them are about the violations that we know are coming forward. Some of it are police reports or community council concerns. So I think there's some real easy kinds of things that we could kind of codify that will allow us to be a little more objective in how we decide to actually review an application for renewal. And they're listed on there. There's a couple of things for you. There's a list somewhere. Oh, that you just passed out. Yeah,
well,
my email that just lists about 6 things. I
Let me jump in here because
actually
she had in there too. Okay,
yep.
So I went through the code, or chapter 10.80 stuff, and printed out some relevant things that already have in code some of the things that we don't say this is the trigger, but these are issues we should deal with. So
okay, thank you.
Hand these out. Did you?
Thank you.
Dean has that memorized. You can pass this out that way. So, and this is just me doing the work. So I bolded some things that are kind of jumped out as this is an issue. They meant quite a bit of work.
Okay. So are you saying that we actually have those in, that tells people we're going to look at this because it meets the criteria by which a renewal should be reviewed?
Somewhat. I think we've had things come up that I'm not so sure are in here specifically,
okay,
but we're probably broadly underneath the category. Like if you say public health and safety, we can reject it based on it's not in the best interest of the public. Okay, that's pretty broad. That's like our brown jug discussion. It's like, okay, where do you draw the line? Is it 30 cans of beer tossed behind their building or 40? Right? So I think you're an effort here to clarify that. It's certainly worthwhile. And so anyway, that's what this.
But that information would actually come from the community council or code enforcement who's reporting it. So it's, we might have it that would be something in here that says we could deny it, but again, what triggers the actual review to begin with?
Right, and certainly NOVs, is it one NOV for odor, or is it 6? Where do we draw those lines?
Right.
Meg?
Thanks. So I think the big difference between what Crystal's proposing and what's in the code is there's actually no trigger for a CEDC review in the code. And the question is, do you want to codify that, or does that need to maybe be an understanding amongst the assembly through resolution, so it's an AO versus an AR.
Exactly.
And I think that should be up for discussion. But I think the reasons you have here are all the reasons. It usually gets referred to CEDC. And I think these are all really great. I actually love that the owner-operator requested is good, because if there's something a little bit funky or different, they can kind of flag it for us and not get stuck before the full body and, you know, have to sit through the meeting before they say we would really like it to go to CEDC. Because we've had a few of those where they're working on it. It's just, it's time, it's been set. So I think that's really the crux of this. Is it a resolution or an AO? Do we want to codify when it kicks it to committee, or do we just simply want to have kind of an agreement that we're going to follow?
I would actually, it's not quite sending it to the committee yet, because we'll have the renewals as a consent agenda item. And what is the criteria for pulling them off of there?
We technically bifurcate those a lot.
Right, so why would we pull that one off?
Well, and that would be possibly the resolution, and it would be up to the chairs and the CEDC to watch for all of those to pull them for referral, or there would be some way that they would be flagged in the clerk, some way, some process, or if it was required by ordinance, then those would not make it to the consent agenda until possibly until such time as they were reviewed. Potentially, I don't know exactly how those that work the process would want it to work, but I think there's some implications about whether or not it's an AO versus an AR.
Dean, any thoughts?
Well, my impression is the triggers that Kennedy listed are similar, and it sounds a lot like the process we have for liquor licenses when we're up for a protest, and I think that the clerk's office does, though, circulate the marijuana renewal applications to the department's court finance for taxes. So I think that there is some process to get these triggers, but maybe we have a disconnect between communicating those to the assembly so they can decide to have review. So I will get that closer, but I wish Mandy were here, because she's fully engaged in this process and could probably tell us where we can make some tweaks so that it works the way we want it to. But I think we have the pieces, but there's just a disconnect somewhere.
Okay, well, and I appreciate that, and if that's the problem, it's a communication thing, then we can fix that easier than having to do a resolution or an ordinance change. But what I've observed as a new assembly member is, well, we kind of think we should probably look at this. Well, hey, can you just go ahead and take this one back to CEDC? And there's no real directive that says you should do that at this point. It just feels very like it's just kind of arbitrary, and I don't like that. There should be some real pointed things that say this, because we've already addressed these kinds of issues that could come up, makes this particular application needs to go back to that and go through a review with the committee. So anyway, so that would be the question then, to find out, do we just have a disconnect with a process that we already have in existence, or do we need to specify the process?
I mean, when I go through, so when I go through them, I'll look for some of these, because we will see NOVs, so they're in there. If there's taxes, we'll see that. So some of these things are very clearly in the reports that we'll get. But what we're missing is, we get the NOVs, is like some we go, oh, it was one for odor, it was 6 months or a year ago, I don't care. Then I get another one, well, they've had 6 and they were all close to this date, I'm not seeing it fixed. Okay, I mean, that would be extreme examples, but then I go, okay, I want to learn more. But is it 6, 4?
Yeah.
Where do you do it? If it's a year old and nothing since, am I good? And to me, that's not in the report. That's very subjective on our part. And then similar, if there are APD or AFD responses, if they were 880 or something like that, we haven't really seen that, but is that a trigger? So, and those are the things that aren't in this code and are where we get subjective. Is that kind of what you're seeing?
Possibly. I like I said, just from what I've observed, there's just been times when, especially like when the chairman said, hey, do you think you want to take this one back and that one back? And it's like, well, I don't see that right in front of me right now, so I don't really know the answer. And even if I did know the answer, what would be my justification for that answer?
Can I go to Ryan?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, just to kind of give like some context, I believe at the early stages of marijuana legalization, recreational marijuana legalization, the Assembly wanted essentially ultimate discretion over these special land use permits and licenses. So that's why they didn't set parameters. They want, from the minorest of things, they want to say, well, we want to re-review this. The downside to, I can absolutely see where you want to get rid of the arbitrary, kind of discretion on these, but at the same time, if you place limits on that discretion, you could have somebody who has, say 4 odor complaints, and then that's why we want to bring you back to CDC. But if somebody has 3 odor complaints, and the complaint is a child care center or a school, the impact of that child care center or school for 3 odor complaints could be greater than the impact of 4 odor complaints on a hazardous waste disposal facility. So that's kind of the tricky part of this. Is sometimes ultimate discretion is good as long as it can be backed up by solid findings.
So thank you. So you wouldn't want to see there to be a limit on the number of violations that would trigger a review. Violations just as a whole should always be a reviewable reason. Sir. Okay.
In my
Yes, I see
opinion,
Jeff
yes,
nodding his
just
head
because
too.
a violation is a violation.
Okay.
Some violations are
That's
more
fair.
minor than others, but
Okay.
I think regardless they should be a factor in your decision.
Okay,
Well,
just
that answers that.
we can end with that and continue, or move to extend briefly. Motion, Jack, did you want to add something?
I'll move to extend.
If you're going to adjourn abruptly, I just wanted to jump.
I mean, we would
No,
move
we're
to
gonna
extend for
extend.
5
Okay.
minutes, so.
Second.
Okay. Go
Just
ahead,
jump
Jack.
to the consolidated list for increase in fines and escalating fines. I just wanted
Where are you looking at?
to, back on your consolidated list of
Okay.
all marijuana topics.
Okay.
I am strongly advocating for the escalating fines, very similar to what we did with the garbage ordinance, where you have one certain fine for the first violation. For the second one, within the same calendar year, you have basically they double, and then for third and subsequent for the rest of that calendar year, of the year within the calendar year, and I'd be happy to suggest amounts.
That would be good, yeah.
Because that's, otherwise, it's just, oh yeah, we have an NOV again, we have a fine, we have to wait until the hearing officer, and it's like, okay, here's $100 again, or whatever the amount is. And that would be really, really helpful for
Yeah,
us.
we've had requests from the industry for that too, so that would,
Yeah,
I think
you
we'll
have to
find
make the
support for that.
suggestion.
Meg?
Yeah, to jump back to Ryan's point really quick, maybe it's just the request, or at the request of planning, licensing, or any member. They can we could start with the list to kind of winnow some of them down, but if there's a request for a reason, it can just be made. And I don't think that we would ever want to limit any members' referral or from our, subject matter experts working through these. So I think that might be a way to balance the interests to some extent.
Jeff, and then go to Jeff. Jeff?
Back on the violations things, they report the building department stuff, but we've never been asked to provide health department violations if we found any in these places. Is that something you would want to have from us as well?
So it's not, the renewals don't go to you for comments?
We get renewals, but we're always forgotten, or, what we do seems to not matter as much, because we've had times where we've done a dry shelf inspection, but not issued a permit, and then we'll go back and they're open, and we haven't given them a health permit yet, and we've had that happen a few times, because something gets goobered in the process and they skip us, and so, it might be good over here on this one that on this D section here, where it requires that they have their municipal license and their special land use certificate, maybe you can add, and their health permit in there, so that they actually have to have it in their hand before they can open.
That's a standard condition.
Yeah, but sometimes we get missed, so, and we've never reported violations. We probably don't see a lot of violations, since all we're usually dealing with is prepackaged stuff, and, our worst violation might be somebody doesn't have their food worker card, but, you know, our refrigeration might not be working and they have to toss out some oil or something. So, but we probably don't see a lot of violations, but if we do find some, we could report them, but we've never been asked for that before, so I wasn't sure if that was an oversight or intentional.
Yeah, I expected that we were seeing any that came up, but it's a surprise. Dean?
The requirements in code for that review by the health and police and fire and body officials. So maybe we just leave that for that spot.
Like a process.
I think it's already required in the process. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Section 10.10.20 about getting certifications from the employees mandates that for medical licenses of the issues we have for one renewals. We should just check that one.
Yeah, so when it breaks down and you get skipped.
So. Yeah, no, we're counting on you to be part of that, so that's a surprise. So we issue a license with conditions, and one is typically health department permit. Seems like it's always on there. But then they get their license before.
Yeah, because we have to do 2 inspections. One, like a construction inspection, where we look at everything and make sure it's built correctly to the health code stuff, and then we do another one once they've loaded all their products in there and make sure that it's all set up correctly for that. And so sometimes we'll do the first one, but somewhere between the first one and the second one, the permits, the licenses are issued and they open, and we haven't even done our final inspection, actually giving them the paper that says they have a permit. So
that cuts them close, so they have products bought and on the shelf.
Right, well, they've opened, and then we just kind of go with it, because we're like, well, do we write them a fine because they opened without a permit, and what would that do to their business, and it isn't really their fault, so. Because somebody told them they could open.
Yeah, okay, that's good, we'll look into that. Right?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Jeff. I think it's a timing issue, really, because the special land use permit and the license have conditions on them, but they need to resolve those conditions prior to getting their NCA. They can't get their marijuana inspection until they have their CCO and their NCA recorded. So the dry shelf inspection happens
months ahead of time.
Months ahead of time, yeah, before that marijuana inspection. But you can't do the full shelf inspection until you've got your NCA and your marijuana inspection, because we don't allow product in there prior to that. So that's where the health permit may be getting missed, and it's typically an advisory comment on retail facilities. It's not a condition of approval, because if I put that as a condition of approval, it puts them in the catch-22, where they can't get that condition resolved because they need the NCA to be resolved, but in order to get the NCA, they have to resolve the condition.
May I ask a question?
Yes, please.
And that NCA, that's out of state code, right? Or is it us?
It's municipal code.
So, okay, well, all right, we can look at that, though.
What's the NCA?
The notice of zoning action.
Yeah.
NCA,
So,
Okay, so our requirements say you can't get those things until you have a health permit, but they can't put their stuff on the shelf until they have those things.
Well, we put it as a, the planning department, put that as an advisory comment on the special land use permit. And it's typically just in the staff report. It's not part of the assembly resolution because it's advisory. So, yeah, it would put them in this weird situation where they're winning and losing at the same time.
So mobile can't get power until they have a health approval, but
yeah,
they can't get a health approval without power. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, is there a way around this?
That's why we do 2 inspections, so we can approve the first one so that you can do your part, but then we get the permit when they have their product on the shelf. So that's kind of, I think, why we have 2 inspections, but sometimes that second one gets dropped.
Is there a way, Jack, like prior to the full CO being issued, that we require a health permit?
I wouldn't allow them to open unless they had just objective to looking at this. I wasn't aware that this even existed, but I wouldn't allow them to open if they didn't have their health permit. You either have it all or you don't. I'm a pretty simple guy. If it says you have to have it, you have to have it. Yeah, it seems like an easy process to iron out to me.
I was going to say, yeah, isn't there some distinction we can make or some code change about the difference between having your NCA and your other thing, but versus being open for business,
right, exactly.
So that they can do those things, talk to the health department, so they have product in the thing, but before they actually conduct business, I think that should be something we should be able to solve. If we can figure out what kind of language it needs to be, then I think we can make that happen.
And when we do our final inspection, the product's there as well, so
Oh.
it's,
Okay.
we can just make a coordination point. Notify else, Amico and us, we're going out there Thursday at 2.
Yeah, or just do the same kind of hang up that we get when a restaurant doesn't have their health permit. They try to get their final CO from you guys, and they can't do it till they've got that inspection report from us.
Okay.
Sure. We can work it out.
Good. Work it out. Let us know. And we need to wrap this up. Anything else? It's just you and me.
Just a couple of comments.
Okay.
Yeah,
Go
yeah.
ahead.
Well,
No
I just
public comment.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say that I think if we formalize this process a little bit more, it also lets businesses know when they're going to be automatically reviewed. They're going to go through a little more process similar to when they have their initial application. So that would probably be helpful for them. But the other thing I kind of wanted to add to the list would be a conversation about whether or not a business can actually begin advertising before they have all their permits. Because I know of one particular place that had their sign up months before they actually got approval from the assembly, and that I think should be a question of whether or not they can actually begin to advertise that they're a business if they're that far out from having any kind of approval. So anyway, just a conversation.
Is that covered at all?
The only thing we cover is your signs have to abide by state code and municipal code. We don't really regulate.
That's a slippery
that.
slope. Coming soon, Sonic.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Coming soon, Sonic drive-through.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, coming soon, pot shop. I mean, I understand where you're coming from.
Mm-hmm.
And,
it's a First Amendment issue.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Something to think about, though.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else? Public comment? Eugene?
Eugene Haberman. I live in the Metro Valley and follow the public process. Number one, I'd like to thank when I came in somewhat late to the meeting, recognition of the public getting information. Appreciate the chair recognizing that and making sure I get the materials. Thank you. And also another positive comment. I've been very critical over the years, and I call it constructive criticism. And I cover a lot of territory. But as far as municipality of Anchorage and dealing with licensing of marijuana, there's a great deal more, significantly more discussion and communications going out among the community on renewal licensing and additional licensing compared to the Metro Borough. It's very, very much limited. And the parties are significantly different than what Anchorage is doing. So with respect, I'm glad there's room for improvement, as you all know, even with what I do. But the fact is, I see a significant difference, and I think it really needs to be pointed out at this time. And I will continue repeating that before the full body of the Assembly on that. So I'd like to say that. About back to the process on issues. The materials are here, but still no agenda on the site to know about this. There's a tape of the meeting, great, but the fact is the parties need to be recognized by the chair to speak, and when you have a free-for-all, the end result is people don't know who's speaking. I do like to make a public announcement alert. That's today. There's a transportation fair the municipality of Anchorage is having today. Starts at 3 o'clock. The Metro Borough has had it for a number of years. In the last couple of years, the Anchorage followed through on that program. It is a really great program where the public has an opportunity to meet the very parties that are involved with these projects and talk about those projects in the future, the plans, and meet with the very people from government and private sector, and bring that up, but note that the Valley has been doing it for years and it carried over here, and I'm glad to see it over here. It's much more extensive in the Valley because they've been doing it for years, but I hope that continues. And then, what was I going to say? Well, I think I covered it. I know there's probably, oh yeah, this thing. Just to know, you note who the Assembly members are coming to the room, but you don't note the record when they leave. So there is a people who are listening to these tapes have no clue who's really here to hear what's being said at what times. The end result is, for the record, Assemblymember Peterson had left at 10:35, and Assemblymember Zalatel left at 10:44, and then also creates a scenario of, and last part with respect, did you have a quorum here when you lost so many members of the committee? And that's all I have to say, and thank you, and watch out for the cold weather. It's coming to us more now.
Thank you, Eugene. Anything else? Thank